specifically that I want to ask you about. So, but man, that's what a career you've had in Australia. You were the operations manager before for the ABL. That what a How do you decide on you said you negotiated. I looked at the ball and bat deal, right? Do you
Yeah.
use Rollins, or how did that work? Were there competitors, or
Yeah, so we were with Rawlings originally. I think it was kind of a legacy of when Major League Baseball was running or was owning the ABL. And then obviously when we went away from Major League Baseball, they went away from us. We had to obviously start looking elsewhere. And I don't know if you know, but Jackson Brett was interning, so the son of George Brett. So he was actually interning with the Melbourne Aces at the time, like the year prior. And then when he went back to the US, he was obviously heavily involved in Brett Brothers sports and really they loved the league and they wanted to support it. So they went and, yeah, basically started talking to Ben Foster, who was the general manager at the time, and started just negotiating. And yeah, that came out with the first year was with them. And then we had a 3-year deal with them. But I guess the second half, we like renegotiated it a little bit and shifted some of it around, which is kind of part of one of my projects, was to just shift kind of the allocations around, so Team Australia and the ABL teams all kind of benefit from the deal, and Brett Brothers obviously get some exposure with the national team and the ABL teams.
yeah, awesome, man. What a fun role you've had within the ABL already, and
Yeah,
that's
it's been fun, man. Like there's heaps of stuff goes on every year, like small team as well, so you pretty much have your hand in everything at all times.
yeah. So it transitioned from the 6-team privately owned league to the 8-team, or sorry, 6-team. The
Yeah,
league owns the teams. Now it's eight
yeah.
teams individually, privately owned. And the transition of that, and how each of those teams take on, those are full budget responsibilities. They have to full managing staff. That must have them, and that must have been just a and just a complex situation in general. What was your role in that?
Yeah, so for me, obviously through the first like 2 to 3 seasons, I think it was, when we were essentially owned and I was doing the operations role, I was largely involved in like a lot of the game day responsibilities. So the venues and making sure that they were kind of up and running, the teams and their structure with, payroll, contracts, all of that. Where obviously teams were still, whilst they were centrally owned, were still staffed individually, but they had a lot more responsible and a lot more reporting through us for all of the day-to-day operations. Whereas when we went to privately owned, it was just about, I guess, transitioning the IP from the league office to the teams, so that the new owners who came in had, a lot more background knowledge. They had a lot more intel on what they were actually doing from a few different standpoints. So the travel, the logistics of, all of that, as well as scheduling to venue hire, venue arrangements, and kind of, yeah, we didn't throw them in the deep end as much as possible. And we tried to kind of help them through it. But at the same time, they were really good because obviously a lot of the owners are very, they're very baseball minded people, and they want the success of baseball in this country and, around the world as well, and want the Australian Baseball League to be more popular. So I guess they obviously came in with their own ideas and are all very smart people in their own right.
Mhm.
So they've really driven that, and it was a very easy transition for them to take over, and it's made everyone's lives probably a lot easier. I'm not gonna
Yeah,
lie.
yeah, I bet. Did the rules for the imports change whenever that transition happened?
Yeah, so I was just I was just trying to recall actually the exact transition dates we've had. So we've gone through a few different import rules with the ABL over the years, for various reasons. And obviously Major League Baseball was involved. They had a lot more of a kind of input into it, and they wanted to obviously benefit their teams a lot more. Whereas there's been a steady trend of up and down of Major League Baseball teams, independent guys, and teams now have different strategies with it. But over the years, we've gone from a points system, a number system. So just straight, you can have 12 players, for instance, on your roster, which can be imports. And then it went from that to, you can have 12 players, but at all times there must be 5 Australians in the lineup.
Mhm.
So that was probably one of the trickier ones we had. I was a player in the league at the time and like a first year player in the league. So I was like, being an Australian, I was always the guy who would like come off the bench in like the seventh and like replace Jack Murphy in the lineup because
Jack
we brought
Murphy.
in another like we brought in an import pitcher, so an import had to come out.
Right.
So like Robbie Perkins would come from left field to catch. I'd go out to left field, and then I ended up hitting in the 3-hole where Jack Murphy was hitting as like a rookie, because of the rule.
Yeah.
And so that one, was probably, it was good. Don't get me wrong, for my own experience and people in my shoes, but at the same time, it was a lot of throwing young Australians in the deep end.
What a difficult task for the manager to have to uh, always be aware of. Was there a penalty in case that didn't happen, or did the other manager just have to like call that out immediately? Is he like checking it?
No, yeah, to my knowledge, it was there was no defined like penalty, but if it was found out at a point, it was taken kind of after the fact, and they would review it and
Mhm.
kind of make a sanction accordingly. But yeah, obviously, I mean, as you pointed out, quite a tricky process to manage in game, and
Right.
I think we were actually caught out one year or one of the games because we had an injury to another Australian, and the only solution we had was to put like an Australian two-way guy in by the name of Wayno. You might know Wayno if you've
Yeah,
played
for
through
sure.
Europe.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he was on the team then, and quite capable pitcher and position player, but was very much a pitcher in the ABL. So he ended up having to go out in the field to prevent us from having a forfeit, and yeah, it just became, that rule was a bit tricky. So
Mhm.
then they transitioned to another one, which was a straight point system where they had points, but then players were assigned different levels, and you're allowed so many like 3-point players and so many 4-point players, and it was based on your level of experience. So obviously, Major League Baseball guys were, 4-pointers because they were the best. And then it worked down to triple A, double A. Asian leagues fit into, I think, around the double A level, and then yeah, everyone just kind of slotted in. You could have so many 4-pointers, so many this, so many that, and that was very much driven on the performance side of the points and almost trying to performance manage the roster. Whereas now we've transitioned. We still have a point system, but it's interesting because now we actually reward, like if you have a player of a higher caliber, that player is worth less points. So like right now this year we have our Asian League players, so NPB, KBO, and CPBL, and their minor league affiliates are all 0 points. So they don't
Wow.
cost you any points because, and very openly, there is a very big Asian commercial focus for the ABL, and it's been a massive driver over the years. We've seen the likes of like Taishan Chang or Tarzan, who came out to Adelaide. He's like 40 years old, finishing his career, CPBL cult hero, and when he played, like the viewership went through the roof. So we're trying to find ways to reward that, create those links with those Asian clubs, and this is one of the ways we can kind of do it. And then the same thing again, we had MLB affiliated players 2 points, and then independent guys were 4 points. We've made a 2020-21 exception this year that MLB and independent are both 2 points, but only because of COVID and the likes of, there was a lot of minor league guys who normally would have remained minor league guys if not for the season being cancelled. So
Yeah.
we kind of made an exception this year that all imports in that category would just be 2 points.
And is it? I thought there was maybe like Manny Ramirez in the league this year. Is there like a one for like the? I thought there was maybe a point. There's a 0 point for
Yeah,
for the high
so there's
end
yeah, correct. So there's a marquee player, which one
marquee
doesn't count to
player.
points or count to the salary cap. So you can have 2 of those. And effectively, to be defined as a marquee player, you need to be a current Major League Baseball player. So for us, this year it was appeared in one game in 2020, or a previous MLB All-Star, or have 5+ years service time.
Wow. Okay.
And then that carries over into the Asian leagues as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so and then what's the max amount of points a team can have for this year, or even
This year,
next year?
15. Yeah, so last year we did 15 points per round because it averaged out over the season at 10 rounds. Yeah. So, but the way it works is you have each round is one roster. So it's effectively 15 points per game, which is we've calculated as per game this year, just because it's a bit more accurate if teams are making in series roster moves. Because like if you take off a 2-pointer and you put on, you know, an Australian club ball player who's a -2, that's a 4-point swing on the points.
Mm-hmm.
So when we were trying to like average that out over a round, it was just confusing. Whereas if you just calculate it per game, if someone makes a roster move, it's just 15 points, 15 points, 15 points. But I guess this is the kicker with it, and not to confuse it, but it adds an extra element of strategy into it in a normal year. A bit difficult in a COVID year, but in a normal year,
I can already think. Yeah.
You can
let me guess on this one. I would imagine if you think you're going to win a game, I'm going to try to only go with like 8 points on my roster, because I think I've got this. We're playing the worst team in the league. I think we're going to win. I'm only going to use 8 points for this weekend. 8 points and 8 points. So whenever we play that team that's in first place, that game that's a little more valuable to us, dependent where you are in the roster, I'm going to use 20 points for those. Is that where you were
Correct.
getting at?
Yeah, 100%. So that's where the balance comes in, and I guess there's so many elements to that. There's obviously the performance side of it. You know, you might try and hold guys back and put them on later, but there's also the element of, hey, we're in a pretty good position here. We've saved some points, and I don't know, like if we just used current players like who are doing really well, like if Delman Young was out on the market, still a free agent, you know, someone might go, oh, like let's go get Delman Young to come in, you know, before the deadline, basically, so we can still be playoff eligible, and then you know boost our roster late. So it's a bit of a performance side of things as well, with both, you know, imports can come in later, Australian guys may become available later as well. It's there's a few elements that have to balance between the commercial and the performance side of things.
Right. So there's no necessarily an import rule. It's just more of a point system.
Yeah, correct. And then like when we're looking at implementing the rules and doing it all, we kind of, I mean, there is a balance from Baseball Australia's perspective that obviously it's still the Australian Baseball League, and you know we need to be looking after both Team Australia and up and coming Australian players. So trying to, you know, keep that perspective in mind at the same time. But obviously these teams being privately owned, they don't necessarily have an invested interest in Australian baseball and what Team Australia do. They do though, because of, you know, the type of people they are and the owners that they are. They are Australian baseball people, so they are interested in it, and it is always in the back of their mind as well. But I guess that's Baseball Australia's perspective, is to balance that element of, well, it's the Australian Baseball League. We still have a national team that is, you know, 6th in the world and is pushing for the Olympics and all of that. So they need to kind of balance our players getting time and experience and getting better. So keeping that in mind kind of element is making the point system challenging, because when we're looking to implement it, you kind of have to see, well, how many imports could a team actually get looking at this system, and then what effect is that going to have on the Australian development later on?
Yes.
So when you work it out, this year it's interesting because with Asian players at 0 points, you could effectively, you know, like Geelong Korea is a really good example. That entire team is, you know, KBO minor leaguers or independent Asian league players, and their whole team is that. And you could effectively do that within our rules.
Right. And you want to promote Australia baseball because it's the Australia Baseball League, but you aren't putting a rule on having to have Australians in the lineup anymore. So it's strictly the points.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. And then that's where it comes into, like, if you're good enough, you'll play. And that's kind of the element that, you know, you still need to be good. Like, this is still the Australian Baseball League. It's still competitive. The league's getting better, so you need to be better as well.
Yeah, and it's up to which is fair. I don't like some of the leagues that have those strict having to have so many players on the lineup. Seems like a a tough managerial decision, and having them to have to
Mhm.
make decisions that are difficult, but you don't want to have the imports take away from the playing time because you're trying to promote baseball within. So it's a tough balance, and something that the ABL is doing that is a lot different than other leagues around the world. And I'm sure they're aware of that. I'm sure you're aware of other leagues having different rules. How did this point system come about? Is this something that other leagues use? Is this something?
It's a,
Yeah. How did
it's a,
that start?
it's a great question, to be honest.
I played
Oh,
in I played in the South Australian Baseball League in Adelaide, and
yeah,
then I played a little bit. I pitched 1 inning in the
yeah.
ABA.
I recalled the name because I processed the contracts when your name came in.
Yeah, I was a little disappointed because the manager had told me that the import they either had I think maybe under if I understand this correctly, maybe they had used too many points before, or he said there's a something with imports where they needed to push for more Australian players for the last half of the season. And I had just rode my bike up to the club one day, um, and told him who I was with my experience. And yeah, I got 1 inning, but it was fine. Won a championship in the SABL, and it was fun and learning
There
about.
you go.
Yeah, I had a great time with all the guys there, and it was fascinating to learn about because the SABL had very similar rules about the point systems. So I had heard about it there. Is that like how club does like football there, or is that yeah? Where does that point system stem from?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not 100% sure on who or where it actually came from. It's kind of evolved over the years, and I think it's just continued to evolve. Now, there is some there is some balance in the obviously the Australian players being negative in the points, but
Oh,
then a Team Australia player is -1, whilst I guess you know for lack of a better term, a club ball Australian guy is -2. So
hmm.
we wanted to obviously you're rewarding teams by playing Australians because the more -2 guys or -1 guys you have means obviously that's how the balance comes in. So you can't fill your team with imports because you need Australians to get those higher end imports. And it kind of all
Right.
balances out. Um, but then making Team Australia guys -1 allows for one team can't just go stockpile the entire national team and then go, well, I've got the entire national team, so now I don't need imports or anything either because we're a pretty good team in general. So they kind of can't stockpile the entire national team and still get their imports. They need a balance of those up and coming Australians and then Team Australia guys as well. So
Mhm.
it still has that element to it that's kind of where it started. And then to be honest, the like MLB players being 2 points and independent guys being 4 points stems from mostly a support mechanism. Like Major League Baseball very much support their players to come out and play in the Australian Baseball League, whether that's just it's through sending coaches as well, or it's through financially supporting them by helping out with flights, accommodation, salary, all that stuff too. So that's the reason for Major League Baseball guys being lower than independent guys, because they are supported and they do financially help the owners,
Mhm.
pay for things through the season and support those players.
Awesome. I like the idea to gain viewership by the going into the Asian market and not having them be worth any points to try to put more players on that roster. Interesting and good strategic move, I would imagine, if you saw more viewership from those players. And I think you see the NBA do that in here in
Yeah.
America. Um, I think a lot of moves are made, not always strictly. You watch Tim Tebow if you follow any sports
Yeah.
in America. Yeah, he put. People think he got that baseball spot. It's almost as a publicity stunt. But those decisions are important for the grand scheme of the league, and it's um, yeah, a great decision. What about the Super League? Right, there's the Super League in Adelaide. Do you know much about
Yeah.
that?
I know a little. I'm not 100% across many of the rules and how they've gone about it. I know this year they changed it a little bit, and they've kind of aligned their branding with their little league charters.
Oh,
So the teams this year are actually like, I think they're I think it's like the Southern Marlins, the Adelaide Rays, and there's one more which the name escapes me. They're the same charter teams that they have through their little league um, pathway. So
yeah.
it's for them, it's now like creating a end-to-end competition. Like,
How
you
cool.
you enter as a 10-year-old into little league, and then in 10 years you could play in the super league as still with like the Southern Marlins team, which
Uh,
is pretty cool. So
yeah, I didn't know that it was integrated within their Little League. Amazing. Do they have import rules in the Super League? Would you imagine?
uh, I'm not 100% sure of that one, to be honest. I wouldn't answer it comfortably, but
Okay.
I know the SABL has a relatively strict import rule in general. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was a couple rules still floating around in there. And I know a few guys that have played in it, but it's
Yeah.
always tricky with, obviously with COVID this year too. It's hard to know because imports were very much based on who was already in the country and who was just available, because it was tough getting guys in.
Yeah, for sure. The expectations that you have for imports that come in, and imports when they come to a new country or into a new league are expected to perform highly, or some of the best players. Sometimes when the flights cost so much to go to Australia, maybe aren't as quick to pull the trigger to release them. Maybe the Asia flights are a little bit cheaper, um, but just the expectations for imports, from your perspective, it's a tough task for imports to come in to perform. Would you say?
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, it's interesting. So there's a few elements. I mean, at Clubland, it's the import is expected to perform, but like they're not going to go and release them, right? Because they've gone and invested pretty good money into getting, and this is like for the SABLs, the GBL, all those local club competitions. So they're not going to go and release them. But when you start looking at the Australian Baseball League, that has an interesting overlay because usually the Asian clubs or the major league clubs are supporting the players to be out here. So it's kind of down to the team, the ABL club, and the Major League Baseball affiliate to have a good relationship, because the Major League club wants that player to come get at bats, wants them to throw innings, kind of regardless of how well they're going, because they
Yes.
want them to come back and be ready for spring training. But the ABL club still wants to win. So it's like, how do we manage game time expectation whilst carrying a guy that's might be batting $150, and it's like he's not really helping you win. But they come with intangibles too, like usually they're a professional player, they've obviously got some good tools, hopefully they carry themselves a little higher and conduct themselves a little better, and that's the intangibles that rub off on Australian players. So there's that expectation, whereas an indie ball guy coming to the Australian Baseball League probably has a much shorter leash. If they're not performing, they could find themselves very quickly, either dropped back into club ball, or like you said, the flights aren't as cheap. So there's not a ready, steady kind of pool of players. Like independent baseball in America is much more ruthless. You go 0 for 10 and you could find yourself out of a job pretty quickly. On a doubleheader day, you could find yourself out of a job.
Yeah, one bad Saturday, and you got the next flight Sunday morning.
Yeah, exactly. So, and because you can just go grab someone else, right? Like there's 100 more guys that are just waiting to take a spot.
Yeah,
So I do think there is an expectation for them to perform. They are, either they're obviously somewhere. We like to think that there's some, depending on who they are, some of them are on par with some of our Australian pro guys, and some of them are definitely of a higher caliber. Like you see some guys come out here, like Delman Young this year, I think is hitting 430, like just unbelievable. And I think he won the batting title last year. So, you get a guy like that, and yeah, you are expecting him to be a 3-4 hitter and, carry the
yeah,
team at times.
yeah. So I want to know, I got a couple just quick fire questions here. What is the goal of the point system?
So the goal of it is obviously to try and balance the roster as much as possible, whilst encouraging teams to strategically align with, either an MLB club or an Asian club, because it has, commercial benefit to the team as well. So, which is going to grow the exposure of the league and grow the league, long term. It's basically going to sustain us and give us some long term viability.
There you go.
As well.
There you go. I like that. I like that. Do you see the point system? It changes every year. Is that right? Or it seems like it gets tweaked a little bit every year. You expect next year?
So it has tweaked. It has tweaked. This is probably the most settled one we've had so far. The only reason it was tweaked this year was due to kind of the minor league season being cancelled and the ramifications of that, and bringing the independent guys back to 2 points as well to just help teams have a broader pool. But I don't see this one, in my personal opinion, I don't see it tweaking too much more from here. It's seeming pretty solid. Teams are being able to cope with it. It's providing a good balance and mix of Aussies and imports, as well as with that strategic focus. So I don't see it tweaking too much, but, we always have a review at the end of the season, and that kind of teams get their opportunity to, make their case. And then, like I said, we balance that against what teams want and what Baseball Australia are kind of pushing at the same time.
Awesome. That was my next question for you. Is that so? There's a review at the end of the season where people have you don't specifically ask about that. You're just saying bring up any concerns you have, and then we'll all discuss it as a group. And then that gets weighed against Baseball Australia as well. They have a say.
Yeah, for sure. So there's definitely, whilst we're still, owning and running the league kind of in its entirety, with the teams are privately owned, but the league still definitely sits under Baseball Australia. So we obviously have that, we have that onus to be guided by what the teams are requesting and wanting and trying to drive that. But like I said that before, there are still Team Australia outcomes. It is still the Australian Baseball League, and we have we have a requirement, or maybe not a requirement, but the opportunity to keep encouraging Australians to develop. And this is a great tool for Australians to develop in baseball. It's something for them to aspire to. So,
well said.
If we're gonna keep growing participation in country, the ABL needs to be, thriving for Baseball Australia to, at junior level to be thriving as well.
Well said. Well said. And all right, last question for you. What advice would you have for imports that are coming to the ABL or any of the state leagues? What would you say to them getting ready for their first Australian season? Because it's becoming increasingly popular to go to that state league as well. It seems like maybe 100. You guys get Australia as a whole gets probably over 100 imports per year. Might not even say more than a couple hundred imports per year. What advice would you give to those imports coming over for the first time?
Yeah, it's interesting. You're obviously coming here with your team wants you to perform, but to soak up the experience as much as possible, especially guys going to state leagues and whatnot, that experience. And Baseball Jobs Overseas and all those kind of websites are really pushing now and making a good run at it. As to, you're traveling the world playing baseball, it's a pretty good experience. And you're coming to Australia, which is arguably one of the nicest places in the world you can come visit. So just be open to things beyond baseball. The travel, the meeting new people, new cultures, and all of that. So my advice is probably, just have an open mind about it all. Baseball's your ticket, but there's way more to it than baseball, and it's it just goes above and beyond that.
Oh, completely agree. That's where I see it as well. I feel so grateful baseball has taken me where it has and introduced me to so many people and let me see different parts of the world that I probably wouldn't have the experience without the ticket that little ball that you helped negotiate within that league provided. So yeah, thanks for that. I will. Yeah. I'm going to kind of I'm not exactly sure I'm going to tackle this, but I'll make sure that you like the quotes. I'll send you an email in it, and cool. so to let you know, I'm not going to scrutinize any league, right? I'm not going to try to come at it from any type of angle of good or bad. I just want to kind of detail out the different styles. And you guys have such a unique style. So thanks a lot for taking the time to explain it to me. And where are we at in the season? We still got maybe like the championships are
we just
March or February.
Yeah, so the ABL championship, we've just extended the season a week. So the championship now is the 12th to the 14th. Sorry, I'm just looking at my colleagues here next to me, so it's just nodding along. So yeah, 12th to the 14th of February now is the championship series.
Yeah, it's funny you say Jack Murphy. Yeah, he was my catcher in AA with the Blue Jays, and yeah, know. Yeah, I know tons of guys in the league right now playing. So it's
Yeah.
I love following the league, and it's fun. The pay seems to be going up quite a bit in the past couple of years as well.
I mean, yeah, it's an element of obviously an element of private ownership. Yeah, you know, rather than it kind of solely resting on the one centralized budget. So there's now more input from other owners and the like. And, you know, whilst we still have a salary cap and everything as well, but that's definitely been able to increase through this process. And it's definitely rewarding the caliber of the league that's increasing to, you know, guys are getting paid more accordingly now with it as well.
And there was a time that the MILB teams were each team had like 4 or 5 MILB players. That's not happening anymore? That was whenever it was affiliated with the MLB. Is that correct?
Yeah, more so. It doesn't necessarily not happen as much anymore. Most teams still have the deals. So, like if you look around the league, the Giants are very much with the Phillies. The Perth Heat are very much with the Rays. Brisbane are very much with the Brewers this year. Canberra and the Blue Jays have a strong relationship. Who's the other? I always forget one. Melbourne this year's gone a route of independent only guys. So it's a balance of that strategy as to what, because you have a lot more control over the imports you get if you go the independent route. You can pick them. Whereas when you are working with an MLB team, they obviously have some input into the kind of guys they want to send, which, you know, it just may not balance with what you're trying to do and what your lineup is. So that's why teams go different routes.
And when it was affiliated with the MLB, did those relationships with the clubs change whenever that MLB dropped the affiliation with the ABL, or is it that was more like manager to like a minor league coach, and that relationship within those teams stayed?
Yeah, so the relationship was very much with like the minor league coordinators and those kind of guys, the international directors. And it was very league driven, but like I said, when the teams were, even though they were centrally owned, with very much, you know, self-staffed and were running themselves. So a lot of those people had the relationship still with their, you know, their minor league coordinator in certain clubs. So as it's transitioned to private ownership, that relationship has transitioned a little bit with it. And that's why, you know, you find teams now they are very solidified in what minor league club that they, you know, whilst they have multiple clubs, they still have a pretty strong relationship with, you know, one particular club that's driving it over the years. Because I think that's just been a legacy from when MLB did own the league.
Right. Awesome, Scott. I look forward to following the ABL for quite a few years, and your career as well, man. It seems you've off to a great start, young man. Hopefully, I'm excited to see where you go within this, and then with an MBA as well, man. The future is yours to make anything you want out of it. So I'm excited to see where you go.
Here's hoping. I appreciate it. Let me know if there's any questions or anything else, or you want to clarify anything more. Feel free to reach out anytime. So happy to chat.
Awesome, Scott. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks. Have a good one.